And we're live, I think. Yeah, I think we're live.
Yep. I think we're live too.
Yeah. This is Polygon Issuance number 60. I put up the 60 minutes thing, the little clock thing for our 60th show, but I don't want to get sued. So I can do, but that's about all I can do. So anyway, so everybody, thanks for joining us. We're doing the show, the 60th show. It is May 22nd, 2015. This is the beginning of the Memorial Day weekend holiday. And earlier this week, and when we're doing the current weather, earlier this week, especially here in Iowa where I'm at, it did not feel like it was Memorial Day weekend coming up. It felt like the first part of April. A couple days ago, we had just rain and clouds, and it was in the upper 40s. It was so bleh. But the minute the sun comes out, and our guest would know this being down in Alabama, the minute the sun comes out, the temperature jumps up good 20 to 25 degrees. It's in the 70s now. Very lovely. Everything's growing. There's no sign of any drought around here, thank goodness. But other than that, stormy weather in the plains. Texas and Oklahoma are getting rain. That seems to be like a recurring theme. But they've really needed it. But now I saw today where the Wichita River in Wichita Falls is possibly heading to record flood stage. I don't think they're going to want that. So evidently there's going to actually be falls on the Wichita Falls, because for the last couple years they've not even, it looks like a little drip coming out from a faucet or something the last couple years. But they have a roaring river now, it sounds like. But in hindsight, our guest tonight has been in Birmingham and in Alabama for quite a bit of his career, except for maybe a year or two when he was in Florida, where he grew up. In Frostproof, Florida, I think that's where he grew up. And I found out, I don't think it's frostproof there.
Not always.
Yeah, so you can't, so it's, the name is lying to people. So he lives in a town that lies to its inhabitants about frostproof. But James Paul Dice, known as JP Dice, is on. He is chief meteorologist at WBRC, the Fox affiliate in Birmingham, up on top of Red Mountain, where all the TV stations are except one.
Yep.
So, and he's in between his competitors. One is to their west, one is next door. And so he gets a lovely view of Birmingham and the surroundings, and he has seen a lot of weather go past Red Mountain over the years, and we'll talk about that. But first off, I'll just call you JP because that's easier for me to do.
Yeah, sounds good.
So, JP, you pretty much grew up in Florida, so there had to be something interesting that happened weather-wise down there, and it wasn't frostproofing. So how did you end up getting yourself into this business, and how did you get interested in it?
Yeah, a good story there. You know, it was not my initial first love. My first love when I was 4 or 5 years old was airplanes. I was infatuated with airplanes, wanted to fly airplanes, and I had a mom who said, if you do that, you're going to kill yourself. That's not safe, so I don't want you flying airplanes. So I kind of filed that aside. And I got really into computers, and I was always good in science. But at the same time, I was one of these guys who loved to watch the news. And the station that I grew up watching was WTVT in Tampa. And there was a longtime meteorologist there. I'm sure you've heard of Roy Leap.
Yep.
And I watched him for years. He always had the best technology there in Tampa. And I was infatuated with the radar and computers and all of that. So I kind of headed that direction. But I didn't know I wanted to be a meteorologist or a weather person or anything. At first, I wanted to be a TV anchor. And I convinced my parents to take me up to Orlando to the CBS affiliate up there. It was July 4th, 1986. I walk into what is now WKMG in Orlando, and immediately fascinated by this. And even to this day, a TV studio fascinates me. And addicted to everything there was about TV. So I was like 12 years old. And as soon as I could drive a car, I got a job at a radio station in Bartow, Florida. did radio through high school, through college, got my first degree at the University of Florida, got into TV broadcasting there, and started hanging out with the weather folks at the local ABC affiliate. There's only one ABC affiliate, only one affiliate at the time in Gainesville, and got an internship there and decided, you know what, this weather thing's really working out for me. I like computers. I like science. Why don't I just do broadcasting and move into meteorology? Went on, got a master's degree from Mississippi State University, and the rest is kind of history. Ended up working in TV and been doing this for almost 20 years.
So you were in Gainesville, what, about a year or so, or maybe a few years?
About a year and a half.
Okay, and then you decided, since Gainesville's fairly a small market, you went to Huntsville, which is a lot bigger.
Yes, let me tell you, here's an interesting story about that. Huntsville at the time was like market 80. Gainesville was market 165, so it was very small. I was down there, was making $18,000 a year doing weekend weather, and you know, those small market jobs don't pay much more than that even to this day. And I knew I had to find something else. So the first place I interviewed was WSFA in Montgomery. That's what is our Raycom sister station now in Montgomery. They interviewed 2 people for the job, and I didn't get the job. The guy that got the job is actually my morning weather guy here at WBRC now, a guy named Mickey Ferguson, ended up getting that job. So it shows what a small business this is. I sent some stuff up to Huntsville, got a call at 11 o'clock at night from Dan Satterfield, who I remember watching on WESH TV in Orlando, WESH, when I was in high school, and Dan was in Huntsville. And Dan said, I want to fly you up. I want to fly you up for an interview. I go up there and hit it off with Dan Fine and the news director, and I get hired as weekends in Huntsville. And I did that for about 3 months until the morning person left, and they moved me up to morning and noon, and I did that for 11 years.
So you did a lot in Huntsville over your, what, 11 years or 10 years that you were there? So was there any, and we'll get to the radar thing, because that was a big thing of why we wanted you on, well, me and my co-host and several other people.
Yeah.
So during the time that you were there was, and you'd know this from being in Birmingham as well, there's a lot of active weather. It's not like Florida, where it seems like there's only some weather, like tropical weather, and maybe a couple
afternoon thunderstorm, occasional hurricane. It's a lot quieter typically in Florida. And here, you know, you have all the seasons. You have winter weather, and then occasionally you have some tropical stuff, and you have a lot of severe weather. I remember, this is a funny story. So Satterfield tells me, oh, for tornado warnings, we go on TV. And I'm like, well, yeah, we did that in Florida too. He's like, no, we go on TV and we stay on the whole time. And I'm like, you know, I've been doing weather for 2 years at that point. You got to be kidding me. I got to talk for like 6-7 hours? And that was the most intimidating thing in the world, to think that I had to do this. But, you know, I've been doing it so long now, it's pretty much second nature. But back then, that was kind of a scary thing.
And was there any events that you recollect from the time in Huntsville? And there's been so many.
Huntsville, probably one of the worst events where we had fatalities that really sticks out in my mind was right before I left there. A few months prior to leaving there to come down here, we had a Super Tuesday outbreak. Remember that one?
Yep, 2008.
And I believe we had, in our market, we had 3 fatalities. That came in, it was kind of an oddball thing, because a lot of times, you know, we typically have our severe weather late afternoon into the evening. This was a really early morning event, started firing up around 4 a.m., and it was ongoing through the morning show. And we were, you know, given a good workout to our radar at that time. We'd had the new radar for a few years, and that was a scary setup. One of the more, I guess, high magnitude events that I'd been through at that point. Of course, April 27th happened a few years later, and you can't even compare that to what happened on Super Tuesday. But that's the one that sticks out the most, I think, during my time in Huntsville.
Now, when you were talking about the radar, which is the Armor radar, how did that come to be? from what I can remember, it was a converted old WSR 57 or 74 that was
74.
74 that was converted into what is now dual pole or something to that effect.
Yes. The Armor Doppler radar, which is in Huntsville, it's at Huntsville International Airport, was the first operational dual polarity radar to be used in TV broadcasting. You know, other folks may say they had the first one. This thing was put together before companies were selling dual pole radars. And it was an interesting project. And the way it all started, we had when I was working at WHNT, we had a terrible radar. We had a little 80C radar that produced a couple of hundred watts, would attenuate badly, and I knew we needed something else. We only had about $250,000. Now, I think we had $400,000 in the budget, if I recall, for a radar. Well, that's not going to buy a radar. So I went to a guy I knew, Dr. Kevin Knupp at the University of Alabama, Huntsville. He's one of the professors there. And I knew UAH had been given that old decommissioned radar, the WSR 74 at Huntsville International. They didn't have the money to get it up running, but it had a transmitter, it had a tower, it had a radome, it had the infrastructure was already there. When you're building a radar, that's a good $250,000 to $300,000 worth of stuff right there, that infrastructure. I knew we wouldn't have to build if somehow we could partner with UAH. So I asked Kevin Knupp, Dr. Kevin Knupp, I said, you guys would be interested in going in on a radar. You guys own half of it, we own the other half. And that is how everything started, the ball rolling to get this dual polarity radar. They wanted a dual pole radar for research. So we went to Barron Services in Huntsville. They weren't selling dual pole radars, but we knew where we could get the equipment to build it if they could integrate it. So we went to a company just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, a company called Signet, and got a what was then the state-of-the-art RVP8 processor, got a dual feed, new radome, used the existing transmitter, spent just shy of $400,000 and got this radar on air, and it was incredible. UAH started getting grant money for their projects using the Armor radar. They got some stuff from some money from the National Science Foundation. They upgraded the 250,000 watt transmitter to a 350,000 watt transmitter and put a new pedestal up there. So the radar within 2 years was a brand new radar, aside from the tower that it was on, which really didn't matter that much. It was an amazing project, and really at the time was the most advanced television weather radar in the state of Alabama.
Now, when you think about it, that the radar costs so little, and there were so many of these decommissioned radars, which unfortunately a lot of them were torn down. For example, like the one in Centerville, which was torn down. And it was so cheap to do. When you compare to what the Armor radar looked like when it was built up and you had the dual pole, compare it to what the dual pole radar from the 88Ds looks like now. Is there a comparison, or is the 88D version better than the decommissioned 74?
The 88D version is very similar. The only differences that you have, and this is just a difference in a S-band versus a C-band, you don't have the attenuation issue with the NEXRADs that you do with the C-band, as far as seeing things and seeing debris and being able to look at some of those radar moments like correlation coefficient. I can't really see any significant differences. Range-wise, you're looking at about the same range, because with dual pole, obviously that curvature of the Earth thing, no matter if you've got a NEXRAD or if you've got a radar that you bought from a vendor, you can't solve that issue. You can throw a ton of power at it, and that's still not going to fix that. So it's very similar. Some of the algorithms had to be redone versus S-band versus C-band. But you know, when we got it, we were just learning what was going on, and fortunately we had some PhDs over at the University of Alabama, Huntsville, that would go back and look at this data and say, hey, there's a debris signature in this particular storm that we saw in whatever county. So we learned a lot during that process. The first debris signature ever for a television station radar was with the Armor Doppler radar, and it was with that Super Tuesday event. That was no, anybody tell you any different? It didn't exist. That's the first time, and that was in 2008 with Armor. And by the way, Armor stands for Advanced Radar for Operational and Meteorological Research. So that's what Armor. It's an acronym.
Which is interesting because it seems like with that the new radar and whatnot, that you and in this case Satterfield, who was your chief at the time, Satterfield was known for a long time to want to issue his own warnings to people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So with this radar, you could warn people that something was there long before the Weather Service in Huntsville, and for even a time when Huntsville didn't have their Weather Service office, the Weather Service in Birmingham could warn people. So was that kind of like a extra tool in this case that nobody else had?
It was, but you know what we did? We gave a feed of that radar when we got it. We gave a feed to it. Of course, UAH had it in their operations. We also gave it to the National Weather Service in Huntsville. They have that, nice weather forecast office that they built in 2000. So they had access to it. So they were actually using our data in their warning decision process. So WHNT and Dan was not issuing his own warnings at that point. Really, it was more of a collaboration with the National Weather Service. He was doing that during that time when there wasn't an office up there, or there was an interesting time when there was an office up there, but the warnings were being issued off an old radar when the NEXRADs were down here, and the Birmingham NEXRAD wouldn't really reach up there, and it was just kind of a convoluted situation, and that was really mid to late 90s. But in 2000, and especially when we built that radar, there was a lot of collaboration between the Huntsville National Weather Service office. We did some cool stuff with them.
So when you have the radar, of course, dual pole also can see different types of precipitation like rain and snow.
Yeah.
And for people who'd say Alabama doesn't get snow, all I'd have to say is snowpocalypse. It does happen.
Yeah.
Blizzard
or ice apocalypse more than snow apocalypse. But we had a lot of snow this year. We had parts of our viewing area even this year. This was pretty messy with over a foot of snow, and that's a lot for the Deep South.
Yeah, I had a storm this year that dumped 13 inches in one storm.
Yeah,
And that was the biggest snow we had from one storm since the Groundhog Day blizzard in 2011.
Yeah, and you see, I mean, that's Iowa versus in Alabama. You're talking about that's an amazing amount of snow when you're over a foot of snow. And the other thing around here, kind of the reaction to winter weather, whether it's 2 inches of snow or a foot of snow, the reaction is pretty much the same. It's going to shut everything down. That's the way it always works. So schools are going to close, businesses are going to close. If it's a little or a lot, it's generally the same reaction.
Which is interesting for the fact that even here, 2 inches of snow, schools are open, you have to go to school, everything's fine. Now,
I remember leaving Des Moines, Iowa. I went up there with Dan Satterfield. This was probably 1999, and I go up there for a radar conference that Les Lemon's doing in Des Moines. It was a great conference, and we get out, and it's a huge snowstorm coming, and we're heading to the Des Moines airport, and there's snow all over the place, and I'm thinking we're not going to get back to Huntsville, but good old American Airlines got us out, and we ended up delayed anyway because of a massive amount of thunderstorms moving through Dallas-Fort Worth. So we ended up at Wichita Falls, kind of sitting there waiting for things to clear out. But yeah, I've been in some of that Iowa snow before, and that's the real deal. But the deal is you guys have ways to clear that out and the infrastructure that supports snow. Around here, there's like a rusty snow plow they pull out, once every decade.
Yeah. And there's a connection, because you mentioned this when we did our test earlier today. This was about 10 years ago, well, maybe about 9. I had to go back and look. You almost took a job in Iowa, and I'd want to ask, why? Why did you not take it, and why did you even think about it?
Well, here's the thing. I didn't really think about it, and I never applied for it. They called me out of the blue. It was a station. I guess there's only one in Waterloo. It was a
Yep.
station in Waterloo, Iowa.
Yep, I know
And
what it is.
and I get a voicemail or something at the TV station in Huntsville. And as a news director in Waterloo, Iowa, he's like, "Hey, I'm interested in you for my chief position here." And what, that's always flattering to hear that. Hey, somebody wants me. I was doing morning and noon up in Huntsville, and I'm thinking, I'm a Central Florida guy. Do I want to? Iowa's a cold place. Do I want to be in Waterloo, Iowa, or do I want to hang out in Huntsville a little bit longer and see if I can kind of stay in the South? So I decided to opt out on that one. It was flattering that he was interested, but a little too cold for me. I'm not a cold weather guy. The weather we've got today, which it was upper 70s, sunny skies. If I could bottle that up and have it 365 days a year, that would be my kind of weather.
Yeah, and I mentioned this with my co-host after the fact when I was in between the test and now that I went on. That was probably about 0506 because that's when the chief that had been there had left was in 06. And
Yeah.
the thing would have been you would have had an EF5 tornado before you had one in 2011.
Yeah.
Parkersburg was in 2008, and and Parkersburg, for those that would not know, Parkersburg, Iowa, is 25 miles west of Waterloo.
Mm-hmm.
And that tornado went just on the north side of town. It missed Waterloo and Cedar Falls by about 3 miles. It's about a mile wide. But unlike the tornadoes in 2011, which were huge, but they kind of went through hills and trees, in that part of the area, you could have seen the tornado. It was rain-wrapped toward the end, but you would have seen it for 10 or 20 miles.
Oh, yeah. I would say 2011 was as far as my own eyes here, that was the worst I'd ever seen. I had been on storm chases when I was a student at Mississippi State University out with Dr. Mike Brown. We spent 10 days out on the plains, and that was pretty interesting. And we got into some pretty ugly weather, and it was, gosh, I can't even remember the outbreak. But we didn't actually see a tornado. We came really close to seeing one several times, but we got slammed with hail in Texas. It sounded like somebody was taking shots at us with a 50 caliber machine gun.
So when, oopsie, there's stuff flying on my screen. Okay, I was wondering what's going on. Okay, so you didn't come to Iowa. My co-host was not happy. He started capitalizing everything about that. But anyway, so
Did he want me to come to Iowa?
He didn't want. He would want. He was like, well, why didn't you come? And I was like, because he hates cold weather.
Too cold for me.
Yeah, you wouldn't have wanted to be here a couple of winters when it was below zero for a whole month. I don't think you would have lasted.
Yeah, I'll tell you kind of my career paths and places that I've interviewed. The farthest north that I have interviewed is Nashville, Tennessee. Okay, not exactly too cold. It's similar to here, a little bit colder. Tampa, Florida. that's a completely opposite end of the spectrum. So those are some of the opportunities that I've had in the past. So no Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That's another place. Cincinnati a couple of times. That's borderline too cold. Nashville. I came this close to taking the Nashville job. And Tampa was a tough call, but I ended up waiting out in Huntsville a little bit longer, and I'm glad I did because the chief opportunity opened up here in Fox 6 and WBRC. It's just one of the finest TV stations in the country. And I'm not just saying that because I work here. It's kind of a well-oiled machine. It's got a history. It's one of those TV stations that has a history of being a good TV station pretty much since they turned it on in 1949.
So it was pretty much that Birmingham is like, well, it's the neighboring market. Huntsville and Birmingham kind of meld together, so you're still somewhat known in Huntsville, and then you'd come down to Birmingham. So that seemed to be like, I want to go there, even though, yes, Channel 6, big station. on top of a mountain, which isn't really a mountain, but it is.
And a big station that looks like a big mansion. It's
yeah,
I wish we could go outside. It's got columns out in front of it. It looks like you're coming up to this huge southern mansion or something when you drive up to it. Very stately.
Like almost like a plantation type thing, except there's no fields anywhere. It's just trees and hills and whatnot.
And, the story behind that, the company that had the TV station back when this facility was built in 1952 was a company called Store Communications, and they built WAGA in Atlanta, Georgia, which is also a Fox affiliate now, and a number of other TV stations, and they built them all to look like houses with these columns out front. So everybody comes to this TV station, they always ask me, so what did this used to be? And it's always been a TV station. It's been nothing else but a TV station.
So you pretty much coming to a big market, because Birmingham's about number 42 now.
Well, it's been shrinking since I got here. When I came here, it was market 39. Then it went to like 44, and now you're right, it's about 42.
So Channel 6, of course, lots of people have been chief before and have built the brand, even when it was the ABC affiliate, and now it was owned by Fox. Then it was kind of flip-flop between like a bunch of owners in trades and whatnot, everybody trading everything. So, and you were there at the time when they were doing a lot of this trading back and forth at the point. But so when
I came in the trade, that's how I got here. I was working. Let's go back to Huntsville. Huntsville TV station was owned by the New York Times company. And during most of my duration in Huntsville, it was New York Times. And then the New York Times company decided, which, go figure, they wanted to stick with newspapers and get out of the TV business. But the TV business was actually making money. But anyway, they sold the TV stations. And this brand new company came out of the woodwork that was just a kind of a holdings company called Local TV LLC.
Yeah.
And they bought the New York Times broadcast group. So they had us for maybe a year. And then Fox, which owned this station, decided they were going to sell some of their smaller O&Os. And, they're keeping Los Angeles and Atlanta and Dallas and New York and those big markets in Chicago. But the smaller and mid-sized ones like what we have here at WBRC, they decided they're going to let them go. So Local TV LLC buys WBRC. That gets me thinking, same company now. All right. And they didn't have a chief meteorologist for a few months here. And I'm thinking, well, you know what? I'm in the same company. Maybe I could move up in the world. So I started sending my resume down here, and my station in Huntsville was very helpful with this. I had all of their blessings. And I ended up getting this job just in kind of that weird time frame when the station was between when it was in the midst of one sale to the other, and I was here for about 6 months, and then Raycom Media ended up buying the TV station, and that's who I've been employed with throughout most of my career here at WBRC.
Which was in another trade, from what I remember. BRC was traded for Channel 6 in Richmond.
Yep, that's right, WTVR.
Because Raycom needed to sell that station because they had already bought another station in Richmond.
Yes.
12. So in turn, they couldn't own the station, so they sold Channel 6 to Local TV LLC in exchange for BRC in Birmingham. Because, and honestly, and I'd say this is just me rambling, Raycom, being based in Montgomery, didn't have a station in Birmingham is sad at the time. That you don't own a station in the largest market in Alabama, but you're an Alabama company.
And they wanted one, and that was something that always had bugged them. And, when they actually formed, they didn't have a TV station in their own city, Montgomery. They didn't own WSFA when that company formed, so that bothered them. They bought what was Cosmos, which became Liberty. They bought those stations, and that gave them WSFA in Montgomery. And then when this property came available, it's like, yes, we could finally have WBRC, which is great for us because we are uniquely set up, unlike any other TV station in the state, where we have essentially a network here. We have the Montgomery TV station, we have us, we have Huntsville, and we also have Columbus, Georgia, which is right there on the Alabama-Georgia line. So we can all easily share news and live shots and resources, and it really adds a lot to our news gathering capacity because we have all these sister stations kind of clustered together.
So does it work out with all the TV weather people if there's like, for example, this would be a good case for Google Hangouts, even if they're not on air, to have all the meteorologists like have a chat over, say, severe weather is going to be here, here, here. It's going to be at this time here. Do you collaborate with them even if it's not on Hangouts, like in chat rooms or whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. We do, you know, it may be something as simple as like a Facebook chat or something. We all know each other and routinely communicate, you know, with each other on a weekly basis. And especially if there's going to be a big event, I'll ask my colleagues in Huntsville or Montgomery, what do you guys think on your end? What are you kind of going with? And one of the things I wanted to do when I got here and when we had the Raycom acquisition was we've got all these TV stations. Let's develop a weather blog. A weather blog that is not just a blog, but a statewide weather blog where we just don't have 3 or 4 local meteorologists updating it. We have 20-something meteorologists updating it from all over the state, all of the different weather operations, and that's what we actually developed, and that's worked out well. You can go one-stop shopping, find out anything you want to know about Alabama weather from 4 different TV weather operations contributing to this one weather blog.
Now all you'd need is a station in Mobile.
Yeah, I'm sure if somebody puts a for sale sign on one, they wouldn't mind having it. Yeah, that'd be nice.
Now, the thing is, when you were talking about the station in Waterloo, and I'm going to bring this up again, because the station at the time, I believe, was still owned by Raycom.
It was.
And the best thing, and my father just hated this, because all they would show is Robert Trent Jones Golf Trail commercials every 5 minutes. Ugh. And they showed Alabama. We're in Iowa. It's like, what did it do? I ended up visiting Alabama like 6 or 7 times. So I've been in Alabama.
It works, doesn't it?
Even after Raycom had already left and sold the station off, which thank God the commercials went away. Not because of that, but because I went to Alabama anyway. And I actually, and I'll tell this story, I'm going to
let you tell that story. I just noticed something here. Jeff, you keep talking. I'm going to grab my power cord because it looks like my laptop battery is, I don't want it to go out, so I'm just going to move the camera around, and you keep talking. Tell that story. I'm listening.
There's an earthquake in Red Mountain. Watch out. So, yeah. Okay. But anyway, this was a couple of years ago. It was at an event that was held by one of his competitors. But anyway, after the event, it was myself, my father, and my brother-in-law. We started driving around town. I wanted to go on top of Red Mountain because I knew where it was because I'm geographically minded. So I went up the thing and saw the Vulcan statue, which is in front of Channel 13, which is next door to Channel 6. And I went up the little roadway up to where Channel 6 is, which must be a horror if there's ever an ice storm. So, and I was like, there's a gate there. And I'm thinking, okay, Channel 6 is not very welcoming because there's a gate there, but Channel 13 doesn't have a gate. It's like, I saw that and I was like, okay, that's kind of weird and odd, but that was the only time I ever saw Channel 6 up close was at a gate. And I was like, okay, that's odd. I'd never seen.
Well, actually, if you notice, though, next to the gate it says, welcome, WBRC Fox 6, which is a little bit of... you got 2 messages there, don't you?
Yeah, there's a gate and welcome.
Yeah.
It was a
welcome.
Saturday, so it
go away now.
Yeah, it's a Saturday. It was a Saturday, so I wasn't expecting it because I wanted to just go on top of Red Mountain because the vista outside your parking lot, which I've seen from the April 27th video that's on YouTube, you can see for miles, and we're going to talk about April 27th. We've talked about April 27th so many times. However, you and everybody at BRC, you had a vista of the whole
We did.
Birmingham Tuscaloosa tornado.
We did. We could see it with our own eyes, of course, and our tower cam here. We had a camera on top of the Alabama Power Building as well, and we could see that monster. It was about 1.25 miles wide, tornado coming, and it just looked like a wall of black, big wedge tornado. And we thought for a moment it was going to move through downtown Birmingham. We had evacuated the studio. It was me and my colleague Wes Wyatt. We were the only ones left in the studio, okay? And I think Derek Scudder, our traffic guy, he was in here. And the tornado moved right behind the building. I let Wes take it for a moment. I went out the back door, and I saw that storm move just to the north of downtown Birmingham. While I was watching it, boards and debris and all this stuff was falling out of the sky, and I actually came back in holding a board that had a nail in it and showed it on TV. That was what was falling in our parking lot. And who knows where in the world that board came from. Could have come from Tuscaloosa.
But the video, which I've seen, which shows just pieces of debris just floating down, is kind of telling that something got hit, and it could have been miles away or even back in Tuscaloosa. So at that point, and given that it was falling and the tornado was about, what, 3-4 miles north of Red Mountain, maybe even more than that.
Yeah.
So, because it crossed Interstate 65 right around where the Interstate 22 interchange will be, because that's where it crossed.
Yes, you're exactly right. That's around Fultondale. There's a furniture store there. It did significant damage to, and that tornado, what we call the Tuscaloosa tornado that moved through West Jefferson County, that one was on the ground for over 80 miles, and then it lifted up somewhere around the Birmingham airport, then touched back down in St. Clair County. And one of the weird things that happened, weird thing for me being an on-air person during that time, I'm on TV, somebody passes me a note. A friend of mine who lives in St. Clair County called up here, and he said, my house just got hit by that tornado. His house he's a judge in St. Clair County. His house was completely, he and his wife down in the basement, they were not injured. But I went to that house a couple of days afterwards, and what a mess. And that whole area, there's a number, he's lucky to be alive. There were a number of fatalities right there where he lived.
When you think of April 27th and the amount of tornadoes that there was, the Birmingham tornado, the one in St. Clair County from the same storm that went all the way into Georgia.
Yeah.
And that thunderstorm pretty much was producing very long track tornadoes, and then you had more storms that were producing tornadoes, some of them not as long, but a lot of them were violent. Was that kind of a surprise that there was that much violence, especially after the morning storms, which produced what I would consider typical Iowa tornadoes, squall lines and tornadoes and squall lines?
You know, it really was not a surprise. You know, the seeing it part, the visualizing what you had forecast is probably the surprising part, because it's like, wow, that's what it really looks like. This does not even look real. But what happened was not a surprise. There were so many indications that it was going to be an extreme weather day that we really didn't see how it was not going to happen and be that violent. You had all the severe weather parameters that were incredibly high, the highest I'd ever seen. And it was a consensus of the models. It wasn't just you had one model here and you had an outlier here. Everything was pointing into a disaster of a day. I would say the only thing that was a bit of a surprise was not the morning storms, but the intensity of the morning storms. The morning storms we knew were going to happen, but I didn't think we would end up with 100-mile-per-hour winds, essentially a derecho coming across the area. I did not think it was going to be to that magnitude.
And derechos are not what I was, from what I can recall, Alabama doesn't get many of those derechos. That's more of a Midwest type thing in the summer, or are there a lot of derecho type events in the South more often than most people think?
Yeah, not that often. I would say during my career here, 5 or 6 times, and that's 17 years in the state.
Unlike here, where we have at least 1 or 2 a year.
Yeah.
But some of them are weak, like 60 or 70, but they last for 12 hours. We had and I'll bring this up. Everybody remembers this. June last year, we had, I would probably call it a derecho. It didn't last very long, probably about 300 or 400 miles, and it blew through the town I live in, and it was 80 to 90 at least. This was at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, it was on a kink in a squall line. Now, hint, squall lines, nice flat line. When you start having little kinks in it, then that raises eyebrows of any TV person to think, okay, that's an inflow area, so there could be something rotating. Well, somebody took a picture of the storm as it was coming in, and there was a little, what looked like a funnel cloud that went right over town, and there was all this wind, but it wasn't concentrated. The tree damage was all over town, so you knew it was a derecho or a big wind. They never said what the wind was, but I was at my parents' house on the north side of town, and I saw big trees. And you would know this from being even down in Florida. I saw trees that were laying completely flat, and the only time I'd ever seen that was on videos of hurricanes making landfall. And I was like, okay, that's at least 90 plus, and that's the strongest wind I'd ever seen in my lifetime. So and things were hitting the house, and I said, we need to go to the basement. There was no, I don't remember if there was even a tornado warning. There was a severe thunderstorm warning. I'm thinking, this is serious. And this goes back to a thing of sometimes people don't take severe thunderstorm warnings seriously. When something like this happens, yes, it had a little kink that could have been some rotation, but there was that thing back in Memphis many years ago where you have a big, huge derecho, 100-mile-an-hour winds, and it could do as much damage as a tornado, but over a widespread area.
That's the thing I hear so many times. Somebody will say, oh, you mean it's just going to be thunderstorm warnings, right? And I'm like, yeah, well, don't look at it that way, because if you look historically around here, we see more damage from thunderstorm warnings than we do tornado warnings in most cases, because the thunderstorms can be much more widespread. There was a time when we had a whole bunch of EF0s and EF1 tornadoes, and you may be on the air for hours and have a couple of trees down, and that's it. And I've been on the air just with a few cut-ins before, with thunderstorm warnings, and you have 50,000 people without electricity, and you have power lines down, trees down, roofs off houses. So thunderstorms can be more significant than tornadoes. It's rare that you get the EF4s and the EF5s, fortunately. The April 27th and even the April 28th of last year, those things don't happen that often. Fortunately, you do get a lot more thunderstorms, and those downdrafts can be just downright mean.
Now, you talk about April 28th, and we'll get to that after we get to Snowpocalypse, the infamous Birmingham 2-inch snow that shut the city down. This was back in January. Was it January last year?
January 28th of 14.
Yeah. Talk about that. That was something that was out of the blue, more or less.
Yeah, that was really the first, what I would consider just an absolute forecast surprise that I've ever had, where things went horribly wrong and nowhere even remotely close to what you thought it was going to do. That was what a nightmare of a day. It was a setup where we thought the worst snow was going to be to the south of us around the I-85 corridor. Everybody's planning on that. We may get just a little bit here. And even the state is planning for a major snow emergency. Auburn, Montgomery, all of those places, I-85 area. So it starts, I'm up all night anyway, just kind of checking the radar from home and seeing how things are developing. And there's some snow out there, some returns on the radar, but I'm not thinking too much about it. The air mass is so dry, looks like a lot of this is going to evaporate, and it's not going to be a big deal. So I get up around 3, 4 o'clock, do a little blog update, and everything looks like it's on track. And get up again, there's still some returns on a radar. Look out the window, barely anything coming down, so looks like we're still good. But the problem was the air temperature. It was in the upper teens, lower 20s, depending on your location.
Yep.
So what happened? You had this little bit of snow coming down, and for a while that was okay. It started coming down in rush hour.
That's not good.
Rush hour, you got all these folks on the road, and that little bit of snow that's out there, which is just kind of blowing around, it's no big deal. As folks continue to drive on top of it, it melts. Well, again, it's 20 degrees outside. What happens to the water? It freezes almost instantly on the road. So you go from just a little bit of dusty light snow flying around to ice everywhere. I'm heading into the TV station. I don't get anywhere close. Massive traffic gridlock. And I end up trying to get back to my house because I know I'm not going to get to the TV station. And it takes me 5 hours to go 3 miles. And that's after I abandoned my car and some guy in a four-wheel drive truck picks me up and takes me back home. But still, it took him forever to get back. It was a nightmare.
So I would assume he wasn't too thrilled with picking up the meteorologist and saying, "Oh, you screwed up."
Well, he didn't really say a whole lot about it, actually. No, he didn't say too much about it. There were some people that were outraged, especially those that were stuck in their car and that sort of thing. But that was one that I went back and looked at and said, I got to figure this out so we don't do this again. What messed up? How did 2 inches of snow shut down everything? What happened on the ground that turned this into that nightmare scenario? So me and Dr. Tim Coleman, who's one of our contributors here to our weather blog, did a paper on this. Did a lot of research on it. He did a lot of digging on what exactly happened, and it was really just a comedy of errors in terms of, as meteorologists, should have been more keen on what's going on radar and the air temperature. The forecast models had hinted at that happening the night before. I tended to ignore them, and I thought, that model's probably an outlier here. The air mass is very dry. But the lesson learned was anytime you have any type of precipitation in the forecast and you have air temperatures around 20 degrees, and remember, it had been an incredibly cold winter anyway, the ground temperatures were very cold, you have the possibility of having a major travel issue. So that's what we were looking at, as we move forward. How do we avoid making those kind of mistakes in the future? So we really pay close attention to the environment we're dealing with and when to kind of sound the alarm bells, so to speak, knowing some of the variables that can really cause a catastrophe.
Now, when I looked at snow events in the past in the South, Blizzard Superstorm 93,
yeah,
you have temperatures typically in the South when it snows. It's typically between about 28 or 29 and say in the mid 30s. So the snow is wet. It tends to stay wet somewhat, and it's not terribly bad unless you get a superstorm of 93 and everything just dumps all at once and there's snow everywhere and you can't go anywhere. But the snow that fell on January 28th, 2014 is similar to snows we get because here it's always in the teens and low 20s when it snows because we get a lot of these snows. In the South, they get a lot of their snows when they get them when it's warmer, whereas we get them when they're colder. So this was almost a case where you were getting a snowstorm typical of the Midwest in the South, where the temperature is way too cold given that it was 18, 19, 20, which is very atypical for Birmingham during the day, and it's snowing.
Yep.
So there was the first problem that I could see is the temperature is too cold for Birmingham standards in daytime. If it was nighttime, I think they would have had the roads treated probably, and everything would have been at least somewhat fine. Everything would.
Yeah, if it had been nighttime, people would have many of them would have already been home. It happened at the worst possible time, and that's what ended up causing the gridlock. It was just a bad timed event. Rush hour, snow, ice storm, not good.
And I've seen it before. There was one time me going off on stories, that we had about a 2 or 3 inch snow and they hadn't plowed the road yet. And I was driving to Cedar Rapids for errands, and the one, it was a 4-lane road. The one way going to town was completely snow and ice covered, and I fishtailed uphill so bad, and I'm thinking, this is horrible. This was many years ago, but coming back was fine. The road was wet, and they still hadn't plowed the road when I was coming back, and I'm thinking, that is so, what in the heck are they doing? Because it was so bad. And this is Iowa. It almost looked like, thinking back to now, and when I saw snowpocalypse in Birmingham, Atlanta, etc., it made me think of that time that I had to drive on snow-covered roads, and it was so bad, and I lived in Iowa all my life, that I don't feel so bad for people in the South who have to go through it if it's like that again. So then that happened, and you're like, snow is going away, because you don't want snow. Because if you wanted snow, you'd been in my market already. But because my market is the Waterloo station, by the way. But anyway,
yeah, I don't want any snow. I'm not a fan of snow. I've seen it. It's fine that 1 or 2 times you look at it, go away. I'm more about sunshine. Puffy cumulus clouds.
But the thing you would have been is, if you had been here, you probably wouldn't have lasted many years, because I could go back to the story of about, I think it was 2 years ago, we had a snowstorm the first weekend of May, and it dumped a foot of snow on the ground in May. Wow. I'm resigning. I'm getting out of here. This is not good.
Well, it's the same thing. I had a call from a news director in, this was shortly, probably after the Waterloo thing. A guy calls me up from Toledo, and he's talking to me about a chief meteorologist job. And I'm like, oh no, Toledo? We're talking about, lake effect snow. I passed on that one too.
Yeah, but you would. The funny thing is, about that snowstorm a couple years ago in May, 2 weeks later it was 100. In the same place that got a foot of snow. It went from a foot of snow to 100 in 2 weeks. That's Iowa weather. You go from.
You ever thought about living in Orlando?
100 degrees in 2 weeks. Because that was the middle of our 2012, 2013 drought years. 2012 was really bad. 2013 was not as bad, but it was still, everything was dry and stuff. So you get a foot of snow, and all of a sudden all that gets soaked in, melts, everything, and it gets up to 100. That's typical Iowa weather. We pretty much here have to say, expect anything from about March, we've had tornadoes in March before, to May. Snow, tornadoes, anything. Everything is on the table. Now that we're into late May, snow is out of the question, although there's been a snowstorm back in the 40s in northwest Iowa that was like on the 28th of May that dumped a couple inches. But pretty much we're done with snow now, except a couple days ago when it was in the 40s and raining. My co-host, who lives in northern Iowa, that same day said it felt like it was snowing. And it was like, I think up there it was 40 or 39. Yeah. And it was.
Hey, while we have a little time here before we hit 8 o'clock, do you want me to kind of take you on a little tour of the Weather Center?
Yeah, do that, and then we'll talk about April 28th, and then we'll finish.
Absolutely. Let me give you a little tour here. Okay. I'll do this slowly so we don't make folks sick. Okay, the area that we're sitting in right now, where I am, this is kind of our on-air work area. I produce a lot of my graphics back here. We have, like many TV stations have, that's the WSI weather producer, not weather producer, WSI Max. I'm thinking long ago it was WSI weather producer. This is the latest from WSI. It's the Max system. We have Max Storm. This is the Barron Viper. We have Viper, and we also have Fast Track from Barron, and we have a bunch of cameras over here that we can access. Let's turn it kind of this way. So we have a computer here that has, gosh, we must have about 30 different cameras. So I'm going to kind of move this way. And we're kind of in our weather command center and a bunch of computers here. We use this area on air. I have a 70-inch monitor back here. I think I'm getting a new one. It's going to be 75.
I want to know why the temperature in Coleman is cold. Did it rain there?
No, you know what that is? The Coleman temperature is at the Coleman Airport, which is not in the city of Coleman. It is actually closer to Vinemont, and it's kind of a hole up there, so the cold air settles down. You know how that whole thing works.
Yeah.
This is the back room. This is kind of our back office area, and this is where we also work, and we all have our individualized computers back here. We have access to some of the computers that we make graphics with, and do work back here as well. So we have that part of the weather center, and then we have this part. We have a couple of cots back here behind the set, and this is where our lockers are.
Oh boy.
And we have a place to hang some clothes and all of that. So this is the weather center. It takes up quite a bit of room here at the TV station, and I'll just take you around the rest of the studio here real quick. And this is that's our set. It's not lit really right now, but that's in the studio. And we'll go back this way, and we have the key wall here. And I've got a couple of computers here that I can access, weather computers, remotely from the key wall. So that's our weather center here at Fox 6 WBRC.
So, and you did a lot of that, because when we talk about April 28th, you were pretty much in where you are and whatnot. When you were looking at April 28th, and I've seen that video too, both from BRC and from 3340, and whatnot. And also when we had Matt Labhan on, famous for the Tupelo tornado from that day.
Yeah.
And I assume you saw what happened in Tupelo on April 28th. That was at about before 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
Was that your first indication when you saw a tornado pretty much going through the north side of Tupelo? You were starting to think, is this like April 27th, but not quite the same? But was it kind of giving the feeling that you had on April 27th?
I knew it was going to be a pretty significant day. You're right, not the same magnitude, but it was not going to be, 1, 2 tornadoes and you're done. This is going to be a busy day. It ended up 28 tornadoes in the state of Alabama, and we were on the air from the afternoon until after midnight. It was a long night, and that's the one where we talked about this earlier. We caught the tornado on one of our cameras, our Bessemer camera that's on one of the hospitals there, and that ended up being an EF2 tornado when the Weather Service went out there and did their assessment.
Yeah, and I can remember about that storm. It just seemed like it was so slow at the beginning, especially when it got into Alabama. It's like one storm, and it just seemed like that line was never going to get there because it was moving so slow from west to east, but the storms were just racing northeast, but this line, pretty much where the squall cold front was moving so slow because you had that big upper level feature, which was about over me, and it was doing absolutely nothing. It was just spinning.
And there was a time there during the early evening we almost thought everything was going to weaken and it was going to kind of settle down, and then it fired back up again.
When the squall line came in, and you're like, and I remember 3340 mentioned this, and I'm sure you saw it too when the Weather Service in Birmingham said, oh, well, these are going to be a squall line, so we're going to have just wind storms. So they're like, that happens. Okay, so you're thinking, okay, good. Then what happened? The squall line broke apart into separate supercells again, and it immediately started spinning up tornadoes all over the place. Because I remember seeing, even on yours, that all of a sudden it seemed like it got to about 9:30 or 9:45, and it seemed like the bulk of the tornadoes in the Birmingham market occurred from about 9:30 until midnight.
They did.
Which is very atypical, because April 27th, all the tornadoes were done before 9:30. There was nothing after 9:30 in Alabama unless it was far south.
Yeah, you're right. That was kind of the setup there. And what really helped us a lot with those storms, our Barron equipment, which I can't say enough good things about in terms of storm tracking. Viper and Fast Track, the Barron shear marker is incredibly reliable, and we saw that thing popping left and right as those storms moved out of Tuscaloosa into West Jefferson County. So we were basing a lot of our coverage and a lot of our warnings on those shear markers from Barron, what we call the shear skit, storm cell tracking and identification.
So when you had, at one point, there were several tornadoes on the ground at once, you had to pretty much bounce between them, similar to what you did on April 27th, even though on your April 27th, 2011 coverage, you spent a lot of time on the Birmingham tornado and Tuscaloosa and whatnot. And I saw this with other competitors, and I'm thinking, okay, while you're looking at a tornado hitting a big city, of course, Birmingham, the biggest city, although Tuscaloosa is getting up there too, there's like 3 or 4 other tornadoes hitting somebody else's house. And that kind of got the ire of me, but then I've seen lately where Oklahoma City is doing the same thing, where they're kind of concentrating on the metro, and they're like, oh, we don't care about anybody else. It's like,
well, it's one of those things, you know, you only have so much time, and you got 4 or 5 bad tornadoes. How do you do good coverage on 4 or 5 bad ones? What you can do, and especially when you're looking at, I've got one that's gate-to-gate max velocity moving into an area that has 300,000 people, versus I've got one that is a tornado moving into an area of 1,500 people. Not that the 1,500 don't matter. Then you have to say, well, I got to concentrate on this big one. We still have the warning information up for the other one. So what I'll kind of go back and forth and say, even though we're not talking about your area right this second, there is a tornado warning for XYZ County, and these are dangerous storms. You need to be in your safe place. So, you know, you try to do it that way, but you end up, you know what I call it? It's called weather triage. It's like going into the ER, and the doctor looks at, there's a person's having a heart attack. There's one over there, it's got a broken foot. Here's one with a belly ache. And then you got the guy over here, it's got a sore throat. Which one do you get to first? And they're all important. You don't want anybody sick or hurt, but you got to kind of break it down.
So, yeah. So where do you see the future of television weather, or in fact the science, or like the radar technology? Do you see it going past the dual pole stage, maybe to other radars like the phased array radar?
Yeah, I think so. I think phased array is one concept that may be useful. I really think there is a lot of usefulness in a network of lower power, smaller radars, similar to what's being done with the CASA project, where if you were a TV station, you would have access to 10 lower powered radars. By doing that, you're always able to sample the lowest level of the atmosphere where the tornadoes are happening, and you're not going to be shooting over them. So I think that's very useful. I'm a person that believes more radars instead of fewer. I'd rather have more lower powered radars than one big power, you know, 1 million watts sitting somewhere, because you still don't solve that curvature of the Earth issue. But phased array, simply because it can sample the atmosphere so quickly, that's going to be very useful. So somewhere a combination of perhaps phased array or maybe more of these smaller CASA type radars. And I also see significant improvements with the NextRad network, how the dual pole upgrades have been tremendous there, and their new sales strategy, which enables the radar to scan during severe weather and getting those updates in more quickly to us. And then in terms of TV, you know, social media has been useful in some regards. Some regards it's a pain, because you have everybody now is a meteorologist sitting in their basement, and some of these folks know what they're doing and some don't. And unfortunately, the general public most of the time will believe somebody saying some heinous prediction versus reality. So you're constantly, as a professional meteorologist, putting out fires that are started up from social media. So that's a challenge sometimes. And I think mobile devices and all of those kind of things have really helped us out getting that information out there when people aren't able to sit right in front of their television.
Now, I'd ask this question, and this will be a two-part.
Sure.
I'm not sure. I think, does BRC have its own radar now?
No, we do not.
They used to, but they don't now. Where is it? Is it decommissioned? Can you make it?
It's not even in the building anymore. There's a tower here at the TV station where the radar used to be. It was just it was similar to the one I had in Huntsville, and the next rads and level 2 data were far superior than that little radar. So, in fact, there are none of the TV stations in Birmingham have operational radars.
And okay, I'd ask this. You did the stuff with the armor radar. Is there any decommissioned radars you can get hands on and put up? Say, for example, I know West Alabama, say Pickens, Tuscaloosa, Greene County, radar there is kind of a little too high from Columbus Air Force Base, known as Greenwood Springs, Jackson, the Shelby County Airport. That's an area that's kind of the bugaboo of your market, I would say, right?
Yeah, over there is not good radar coverage. That is a little bit of a hole. But yeah, the decommissioned radars are over and done with. I don't think there are any. I know in the state of Alabama, that was we cashed in on that one in Huntsville, and that worked out well for us. But the rest of them, they are long gone. They're in radar heaven somewhere.
So what you'd probably need, since Raycom is pretty big, put up, say, a radar, say, in Coleman that could be used by both the Huntsville station, which is channel 48, and yours.
Now, we do is Huntsville, WAFF has a 1,000,000-watt radar, and we have access to that radar as well, which does give tremendous coverage in the Coleman area.
Which has been destroyed by April 27th, but it was rebuilt.
It was rebuilt. It came back. It was a 250,000-watt C-band that was resurrected as a 1,000,000-watt C-band.
So the tornado did something. They improved it. So
yeah, they did improve it. It was interesting. They had a camera on that tower, on the radar tower, and the dang tornado came right. You could see it coming right toward the radar.
Yep.
So when Jay Prater found the position, the land for that radar back in the late 1990s, he always said this is a prime location for tornadoes. Well, I think he nailed it, didn't he?
Yeah. So when you're heading into the summer, and we're going to be heading into hurricane season, do you think there's going to be any hurricane activity that could affect Alabama this year?
You know, you always wonder about that. We've been very blessed here the last number of years where we haven't had a whole lot going on in the Gulf of Mexico. I don't think this year is going to be overly active, but even if you get one in the wrong place, it can be a problem. One of the things that we get a lot of complaints about, or people they don't quite understand, like last year and the year prior, the hurricane forecasts were for above average number of storms, very active hurricane years. And they were. There were many named storms. What those hurricane forecasts don't predict is, are they landfalling hurricanes? And they were not. So that's kind of the difference. This year, general kind of the consensus is it's not going to be an overly active year. We'll see how that works. I'm not one for having an incredible amount of faith in long-range forecasts, because sometimes we do have some challenges just getting the next 3 or 4 days right.
So we'll probably finish that out with the interview. So you have to do a shout out. I didn't mention this. I don't know if anyone sent you the email that was in my name about shout outs, but this is a shout out. You can shout out a person, a place, a thing, former colleagues, vile enemies that you don't like or whatnot, or places you don't want to be doing weather, pretty much anywhere north of, let's say, Dixie. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could do San Francisco. It never gets cold there.
It's a little overcast all the time. I need some sunshine.
Then you go to Los Angeles.
West Palm Beach is a nice place. WPTV, that's a good TV station down that way.
Okay, yeah. So he wants to leave. So Channel 6's chief job will be open soon.
No, I don't think I'm going anywhere, and I think Steve Weigel down at WPTV is going to be staying put for a long time. But let's see, a shout out. So a shout out to somebody, huh? I'll give a shout out to my old buddy, my colleague Dan Satterfield at WBOC TV in Salisbury, Maryland. He's the chief meteorologist up there now, doing a heck of a good job.
And Dan's been on our show before.
Yeah.
Live,
Good guy. Good guy.
Yeah, live from his bedroom, which was kind of weird. So
Yeah, I don't know. That's an odd place there, Jeff, for Dan to be live from. Don't ask me that setup, but whatever.
yeah, because he had to do it between shows, so he ran home. And I'm thinking you could have done it at the TV station, but oh well. That was back.
I like doing it at the TV station because we have this nice, atmosphere here, and I can show you all the stuff.
Yeah, but you could have done this show from out in the columns, out in the backyard, or in the parking lot. But I don't know if the Wi-Fi or the internet connection would have done well there.
Oh, we could have figured something out.
Yeah,
I really appreciate you asking me on.
That would have been cool, given the fact it's still light out right now. So, but anyway, so I'll tell people who's going to be on, so JP doesn't feel so bad that he's not like the last guest that will be on. But next week, everybody, Steve Hilberg, the former director of the Midwestern Regional Climate Center, will be on. So that's going to be talking about the climate of the Midwest. He worked on some studies on rainfall things in urban areas back in the 1970s. So we're probably going to talk about that. Dave Spielman from KVIA in El Paso, Texas, where they absolutely have no weather. So JP may be going there, as long as he knows Spanish. We'll be on June 5th. Jason Myers from WTVQ in Lexington, Kentucky will be on June 12th. And we have several other people that are not getting a hold of me or whatnot, and we're kind of on a hold with a bunch of people, so we'll see if we can get a hold of them and actually get them scheduled. So we do this show every Friday night at about 7 o'clock Central Time or 8 o'clock Eastern or 5 o'clock Pacific, and we do it over Google Hangouts. JP, how can people get a hold of you if they want to get
very easily. They can reach me on Facebook. Just search JP Dice Fox 6. You can get a hold of me that way. I'm on Twitter, JPDice_Fox6, or you can email me at jdice@wbrc.com. I'm going to take off, Jeff. I got some teases to shoot here and do a little weather for tonight. You have a great weekend, Memorial Day weekend. Be safe out there, and wish you could have a little bit of sunshine there in Iowa.
Yeah, I had too much today. So thanks, JP, and we'll have you on maybe when the weather is more active again.
Yeah. All right, we'll see you later.
Okay, thanks. So we're going to get a hold of me. You would email me, iowx@gmail.com. That's iowawx@gmail.com. You can get a hold of me that way. You can get a hold of me on Twitter. That's at IowaWX, IOWAWX on Twitter. You can follow the Iowa Weather Network. That's the site that I co-own or co-found or whatever it is with a bunch of our staff. You can find us on Facebook, on Twitter, on our website at iawx.net, or I'd have to think what it is, but whatever. You can watch our show, as always, at iawx.net/polygon or polygon.iowawx.tv. So for everybody that's been on, JP, who's now doing teases, he's teasing about great weather probably. This is Jeff Wilcox as your host tonight. So thank you. Have a safe Memorial Day weekend. Stay dry if you're in a wet area, and God bless.